Hello my lovely Misfitians, and welcome back to another video. So it has been a while since I have been on this channel, and that is because I have been in recovery basically. I had a rough go. The last video I made, I thought I was starting to get better, and then I took a turn for the worse. But now I am finally, after several weeks, feeling much better. So I wanted to let you know first off that I am back to my old self now, and hopefully I can keep up with these videos because I really did miss making videos. And my body is finally back to feeling normal again. Let's put it that way. So yeah. Thanks for all the comments and all of the just wonderful, kind words over this time. I have been reading them, and they really have brightened my day, especially when I got really sick. But thankfully, I am back to myself again, and hopefully I can get back into recording on a weekly basis. That's my plan, so we shall see. So for this week's video, I wanted to basically share with you a new supply that I have been playing with. And actually, one of y'all recommended this supply. So I'm just gonna put the name up of this new supply that I'm using. I don't want to butcher the name. I'm not exactly sure how to say it, but one of y'all actually recommended for my watercolor paper search that I'm still working on and stuff, that this particular paper, and specifically this journal, might fit what I'm looking for. And basically I am in the, I guess, search for hot press, very smooth watercolor paper that is 100% cotton. I really like 100% cotton. But I have noticed recently I've been preferring the paper that is a lot more smooth of a texture compared to cold press, which has more of the bumps. And I think that's mainly because I like to photograph my art, and since cold press has those bumps, it actually shows up in the photograph, and when you're working on hot press, it doesn't have those bumps, so you don't see it as readily when you're taking a photograph of your artwork. So I have to say, and I really wish I knew who recommended this. They recommended it probably like 4 or 5 months ago, and I purchased it, and it has just been sitting in my art studio. But I want to say thank you to the person who recommended this, because this paper I absolutely love. So usually if I'm using a journal, I use the Paul Rubens watercolor journal. I've liked that one for years, and a lot of times I will use that if I'm just playing around with supplies, because it's a cheap watercolor paper, but also it has, once again, that smooth hot press texture. But I wanted to try something new, and one of y'all recommended this particular journal, and I have to say, with first impressions, I first off absolutely love it. Now, I haven't played around with watercolor on this yet. I'm going to be playing around with that in the future, but the first thing I wanted to do was just play around with inking, specifically with P.H. Martin's black matte ink, as well as with Micron pens. And I even played around with some Copic markers. I purchased myself some Copic markers because I was just curious and I wanted to play around with like a small set. So I got one of the smaller like pastel sets to play around with, and I wanted to see how this particular paper handled, first off, like a wet and wet technique with ink, and also how it did with pen work as well as markers. And I have to say, I really liked this particular paper. I really enjoyed working on it. It was just a lot of fun. The one downside I will say is I feel like the journal binding isn't super sturdy. I would say the binding is probably going to fall apart within probably a couple weeks, especially if you're working heavy on it. It does lay open pretty flat, which is nice, but at the same time, I can just feel the glue for the binding starting to fall apart. So if you want something that's got like a really nice, secure binding for a watercolor journal, this is probably not going to be your go-to. But as for the paper and how I felt drawing on it, as well as how it looked at the end of this whole process, this journal is exactly like what I'm looking for in the paper texture and everything, with ink and Copic pens, or Copic markers, I should say. I have not tried a watercolor yet. I'm planning on trying that next with this particular journal, but I really, really enjoyed working on this with ink and basically kind of went back to my roots, because when I was a kid, I actually did a lot more ink work than I did watercolor work, because it was easier to get like a Sharpie pen or just a black marker or even just a black pen than necessarily watercolor supplies. It was easier to just kind of tote those around and play around with that. So I felt very much like a kid again, just playing around and messing around or whatnot. Right here you'll see me erasing a lot of my pencil sketches so that the ink is all that shows through. And I have to say, the pencil marks really erased well. So if you were wanting to also erase on this paper, it's, I would say, strong enough to do well with erasing and lift up that stuff, but it's not completely destroying the paper. So that's another really nice thing about this paper. But I just wanted to share kind of my experience with this paper. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I said, I haven't tried watercolor on it yet, so we'll be testing that out probably next week. But I wanted to just play around with ink first and see how it did and if it bled through the paper, which I'll show you at the end of the video if it does or not. And here you'll see me just playing around with a Copic marker, which I have to say I really enjoyed playing around with. I wanted to basically add some color to the black and white ink, but I didn't want to add necessarily watercolor at first. I just wanted to play around with markers, and this was a lot of fun. Just using this more pastel-y peach color, it kind of, when you mix it with the P.H. Martin Black Matte ink, it gave it more of kind of a sepia kind of tone. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, this was just a really quick kind of owl drawing study with ink, as well as you can see, the Copic marker, and testing out this paper and just seeing how it worked with these particular supplies. Now, I will say the black ink did not bleed through with this paper at all, but the Copic markers did. So if you want a paper that's basically durable enough, I would say, to not bleed through, keep in mind that this paper does have some bleed through tendencies. So if you're looking for that in a journal, keep that in mind. But I have to say, I really enjoyed working on this paper. I'm bad actually about keeping up with a journal. One of the goals that I wanted to do this year is work more in a journal. Usually I like to just paint on a sheet of paper. But I want to start keeping more journals with illustrations so that I can just kind of keep them through the years and see my progress more than just having like these little buckets of sheets of paper like I usually do. A lot of times my watercolor journals are just swatching and experimenting with supplies. It's not really illustrations, I would say. But I want to try and do more illustrations in journals. And so this particular watercolor journal was a nice addition to my supplies and just kind of playing around with stuff. As you can see right there, there was bleed through. From the other side, you can really see it with the Copic markers. There wasn't a lot of the ink going through, which was nice. But yeah, that is what this week's video was about, and I definitely really liked this particular journal, and next week I'll be playing around with just watercolor in this journal and see how that goes, and sharing just different experiences as I play around with new supplies. So I hope you enjoyed this. Lots of love, y'all, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.